It's good to see you again. How have you been feeling this week?
Okay, I guess. I mean, pretty good. I guess. I don't know. I guess I just feel worried that I'm not getting better fast enough, but I mean, I'm doing better now than I was like last week.
Okay, I'm glad to hear you're feeling better than last week. Were you able to complete your anxiety score sheets throughout the week?
Yeah, well, I did like 4 days total. I forgot on the other days.
Okay, I'm glad you got to do it 4 times. That'll be really helpful for us. Okay, so it does seem like you're having a little bit less anxiety than last week, which is great. Have you noticed any difference before or after getting your Lexapro increased by your primary care doctor?
Um, well, I think I started feeling better just from coming to the therapy anyways, but yeah, I did notice after about a week of taking the new dose, I started to feel like less anxious when I woke up in the morning.
Okay, that's good. I'm glad to hear that's working for you. What else do you think has contributed to decreasing your anxiety?
Um, well, I was able to start reading that book you suggested. I couldn't believe how much I could relate to that guy in like the first chapter. It was really interesting to see it from an objective standpoint. I guess it made it feel more normal for me to have this anxiety.
Okay, wow. So you actually took the initiative to go out and get the book and start reading it. That's great. You're really taking charge of getting yourself better. You should be really proud of yourself for taking that initiative.
Well, it was probably just like the medication that did it, anyways.
Well, I'm sure the medication helped, but I wonder if doing your reading and paying more attention to your thoughts played a bigger role in helping your anxiety.
Well, yeah, I did feel better when I was able to actually read the book.
Okay. You took initiative to read the book, and that made you feel better. I think that says a lot about how dedicated you are to getting better.
Yeah.
Okay, so what problem or problems would you like to talk about solving today?
Okay. Well, let me think. I have to travel home for Thanksgiving on Wednesday, and there's a lot of tunnels on the way there, and I have to drive by myself, so I can't just fall asleep during the ride or anything else, so
Okay, so should we put traveling home on the agenda?
yeah, we should.
Okay. And then what else? Anything else?
Hmm, probably, well, a lot of my dad's friends will be coming and bringing their own food, so I'm really worried about that.
Okay, so is Thanksgiving food something you'd like to put on the agenda?
Yeah.
And then, is there anything else you want to put on here? On the agenda for today?
Um, that's probably pretty much it. Well, and just going along with like the Thanksgiving food and everything, like in general, I just really want to work on eating more foods. Like I
Okay.
want to be able to eat out more and try new things without being scared of trying them because like I always think about like the allergies or like what might be unsafe.
Okay. So we can call that. Is it okay if I call that food allergies for the agenda? Does that sound okay?
Yeah, it's all the stuff I really want to talk about though, basically for this week.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Now, can you give me a little update on how this past week went for you?
Yeah. Um, it was, I don't know, it was pretty good. Like, in terms of work and school and stuff, I've been getting good grades and work is going well. Like I said, my anxiety has been a little better, so it's making it easier for me to concentrate on the things that I, like, need to do.
That's great. I'm glad to hear you're being better able to concentrate as your anxiety goes down.
Yeah. Well, I still felt, though, like, that myself doing what you called ruminating over this Thanksgiving stuff, especially when I wasn't busy. Like if I was driving home from work, I started to think about it. And then I felt really anxious and it kind of ruined my evening.
Okay, so you were really thinking and worrying about Thanksgiving a lot this week, and that kept coming up, and it was usually happening when you were driving home from work.
Yeah, usually that was when I started feeling really anxious.
Okay. So we've already talked about how reading the book and taking your medication has helped you feel better. Was there anything else positive this week that helped you feel better?
Well, when I was at home with my boyfriend and we were watching this TV show we really like, I didn't feel as anxious because I was really into the show. So.
Okay, so it's like you're able to distract yourself a bit with TV when you're feeling anxious?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. All right. Thanks for giving me that update. We've already reviewed a little bit of your homework in the course of you telling me about your week. Do you have your therapy notes from last week so we can see what all you had on your homework?
Yeah, I have some notes here. I have on here, read at least 2 chapters of the book. Things might go horribly wrong.
Okay, that's the book you chose to do.
Yeah, but I actually read like 4 chapters. So.
Oh, great. Okay. So you mentioned earlier that you could really relate to the first character in the book, and that after reading, you felt better.
Yeah, I did. Okay. I'm definitely going to continue. When I have time over break, I'll read it more.
Okay. And then what else is on your list of homework from last week?
Continue to take my medication every day, and I did that.
Okay.
Actually, I did miss one day, the day after our session, but once I reviewed through my notes, I put a post-it note up on the fridge to help myself remember to do that.
Okay, that's great. That was actually part of the homework too, right? To leave yourself a note somewhere in your house so you could remember to do your homework and stuff.
Yeah, that was a little, kind of weird, though. I trust Ryan, but I don't really want him looking at, my therapy stuff. It's kind of weird. So I just put it in the drawer by my bed, and that worked.
Okay. All right, what else was on the list?
I have to do my anxiety symptoms list every day, which I told you I did 4 times.
Right, okay.
And to do my relaxation exercises every day.
Okay, that's right. How did that go?
I use them at least once a day. Sometimes they were really hard to do, but it does get easier the more that I do them.
Okay, did that seem to help your anxiety at all?
A little bit, temporarily.
Okay. Well, I suspect that'll help you even more as you continue to do it. Sometimes it takes a little bit of getting used to it. It's kind of awkward for a lot of people that aren't used to doing it. So I think it'll help more, and as you do it every single day, you'll feel more relaxed longer term than just temporarily. What else was on your list? Anything?
It was to jot down any time I realized one of the triggers of my anxiety.
Okay. Were you able to write any of those down, or?
Well, I wrote down just a couple of things. For one, I get anxious when I'm driving home from work, and also late in the evening when Ryan is still working.
Okay. Do you have any idea why that's a trigger for you?
I think when it's getting late, I start thinking about what I have to do tomorrow.
Okay.
And then I'm by myself. Ryan's not home, so I don't have anyone to talk it out with. And I start getting anxious without any distractions because I'm alone.
Okay. I wonder if we can come back to that later in the session and talk about ways we can curb that late night anxiety. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. And is there one more thing on your homework list? I think I've written down one more.
The allergy appointment. I can't believe that we forgot about that.
Oh yeah, that was big. Okay, so how did that go?
It actually went pretty good. Dr. Smith confirmed that I'm not actually allergic to any of the shellfish, fish, nuts, or any of the fruit categories.
Wow, that's awesome. So I'm really glad you followed through with that appointment.
Yeah, I still haven't eaten any of the foods that I'm scared of, but the doctor offered to have me come in and do, test foods while being in his office. He can monitor me for, any reactions or anything.
Okay, that's great. I'll bet we can find a way to work that into your homework for next week.
I figured you'd say that.
Okay, so now earlier you said you wanted to discuss traveling home for Thanksgiving food, and the food allergy thing as part of our agenda. Just in case we don't have time to talk about all 3, which of those is the most important?
Probably traveling home for Thanksgiving.
Okay.
But I think, talking about how I can relax a little bit or relax a little about that will be helpful.
Okay.
Because I've done it before, but what I really want to talk about is the food stuff in general, not just like Thanksgiving.
Okay.
Because I mean, I can always make my own food for Thanksgiving.
Okay. So we'll talk about traveling first, and then we can talk about the anxiety you have about food.
Okay.
All right. How about you try and give me a picture of what's going on when you're thinking about traveling home for Thanksgiving?
Okay. So, okay, for example, I start thinking about how a lot of people travel on Thanksgiving, so there will probably be a lot of traffic. So if there's a lot of traffic, that means it's likely that at some point it's going to be stop and go. And then I think there will probably be traffic in the tunnel, and if there's a lot of traffic, there will probably be a crash in the tunnel, and then I'll be stuck in there in the tunnel.
Okay, so that's a lot of thoughts going through your head. Let's try to identify what the automatic thoughts are, like we have before. So you're thinking about being stuck in traffic, and your automatic thought is...
The tunnel is going to collapse while I'm stuck in the traffic.
Okay. So let's evaluate. Remember what we talked about before, like validity and utility of certain thoughts? Do you remember what those mean?
Yeah, like you were saying how valid the thought is and how useful the thought.
Right, exactly. Okay, so what evidence do you have or know of that supports the thought that the tunnel is going to collapse?
Well, I've never really heard of a tunnel collapsing, so it's probably really unlikely that it will happen, but it's possible.
Okay, so I heard you say that there's evidence that the tunnel won't collapse. So you've never heard of a tunnel collapsing before. So it is possible, but it isn't very likely.
Right.
Okay, and how useful is it for you to think the tunnel is going to collapse while I'm inside of it?
Well, I guess it's not really useful at all. It just makes me feel panicked.
Yeah. Okay, so this automatic thought that you're having, oh my gosh, the tunnel's going to collapse on me, it's a little valid because anything's possible, but it's not very valid, and it's not very useful at all because all it does is upset you.
Yeah, it just kind of spirals until I'm so worked up, I think, about just not going at all.
Okay. What kind of images are you seeing whenever you start to get worked up?
I'm picturing myself sitting in traffic by myself.
Okay.
And I'm approaching the tunnel, and traffic is stop and go. And I get inside the tunnel, it's really dark, and the tunnel seems like it's miles and miles long, and I picture there being a crash a few cars ahead of me, and so I have to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And I look around, and all the other cars are stopped. And then I'm stuck in there, there's no way to get out, and no way to get home. And what if I have a medical emergency, and I can't get any help?
Okay, what happens after that?
I'm just trapped there, and my heart is racing, I feel like I can't breathe.
And then what happens?
I don't know. Like, I'm just trapped. That's the problem.
Okay, so you're going to be trapped there for the rest of your life?
Well, no, but it would feel like
Okay.
I was.
Okay. And so then what would happen next? If you're not going to be there for it, like, what happens next?
I don't know, like, I might have, like, a medical issue, because I have asthma, so I might have an asthma attack.
Okay, so that is, like, the worst, is that the worst thing that could happen?
Yeah, I guess, well, like, being trapped in there, and not being able to get out, and having an asthma attack, that would be the worst.
That would be the absolute worst that could happen. Okay. And so what would happen next?
I guess I would, like, look for a way out, or get help or something.
Okay. So, a lot of the time, people with anxiety, their image that they get whenever they're really anxious or worried about something is they stop in the absolute worst moment that can possibly happen. So, it sounds like when you're thinking of this image of what's going to happen when the tunnel collapses and you're going to have this medical emergency, you're going to be stuck in there, you're going to be worried about it collapsing, you stop there, you don't think about like what the next thing is that could possibly happen. So let's try to keep imagining like what would happen next. You said, okay, you would try to get out and get help. So then what would you do?
Well, I'd see if I could get into one of those doors and get out of the tunnel. or maybe a cop would come because of the accident and I could ask like him for help.
Okay, that's a great idea. So you would get help. Then what would happen?
Well, the police would probably call for an ambulance if I needed one, and then they would come and get me.
Right. Okay. So what would be the best thing that could happen in this situation where you have an asthma attack in traffic in a tunnel?
Well, that it doesn't collapse, and then I ask someone for help, and they get me out, and they help me.
Okay, great. What's the most... Okay, so you said what's the worst and what's the best. What's the most realistic thing that'll happen on Thanksgiving when you're traveling?
I guess the tunnel probably won't collapse, and I might sit in traffic for a few minutes, but that it will eventually get moving, and I won't have any medical problems, most likely.
Okay. Right. So do you feel less anxious when you try to imagine and think about that more realistic outcome as being something that might happen as opposed to what you were thinking before?
Yeah, I feel better, like, reminding myself of the most realistic result, but, like, those images just, like, even though I'm thinking about the realistic one, I keep popping into my head of being stuck in there in the dark.
Okay, so let's see if we can change those images. So you're sitting in traffic and approaching the tunnel and you start to get anxious. Other than the scenario you described a few minutes ago, what else might happen next?
Maybe I'd sit in traffic for a few minutes, and then maybe the traffic would get bad for a while, but then I'd get through the tunnel.
Okay, is there any other scenario that could happen?
Maybe there won't be any traffic, and I can just drive through normally through the tunnel without any problems.
So that sounds like the absolute best scenario that could happen. You just drive straight through and everything's cool. Do you think if you tried to imagine one of those scenarios instead of the worst one that you might feel less anxious as you're driving this week?
Yeah. It feels better to imagine that happening. I can almost convince myself that, like, the good thing will happen. Like, almost.
Okay. All right, so why don't you write that down for homework this week? You can write, like, a sentence to yourself to remind yourself. So when I start to imagine the worst case scenario about traveling this week, I will start to imagine the best case scenario instead. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so anytime you begin to imagine the worst, you can just pull out your therapy notes and remember to imagine the best case scenario instead.
Okay.
Would you like to move on about talking about the food stuff now, since we have limited time, or would you like to keep talking about the travel?
We can move on. I feel pretty good about, like, the homework plan. So.
Okay. So now we've talked about your fears regarding eating new foods in the last couple sessions, and even some foods that you've had in the past. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, when I was little, I had a lot of food allergies, and then I kind of grew out of them, and then I didn't have any for a really long time. But last year, I had a really bad allergic reaction, and I could never figure out what it was from. So now I avoid anything I had for that, like, 24 to 48 hours before I had the reaction.
Okay, what was the reaction that you had? What happened?
Well, I had hives, and they lasted like 3 days, and they were all over. So.
Ugh, that must have been scary and really uncomfortable.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. And I read online that the next time you have a reaction, it can be worse than the first, so I'm worried about something worse than that, more serious happening.
Okay. I can imagine that's, like, really worrisome for you.
Yeah.
Especially having, like, a history of allergies and stuff.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, why don't we make a list of foods that are least scary up to the most scary for you? And then together we can create a plan for reintroducing you to each of those foods one at a time. And we can ask Dr. Smith for his help, like how you were talking about how he would let you come back to the office to do, like, test runs. Does that sound like something you would be willing to do?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So, let's see. You can make a list of, like, 1 to 10 on here. And we'll say 10 is the most anxiety-provoking food, and 1 is nothing. So what is the most anxiety-provoking food for you?
Probably any kind of fish or nuts. Except for almonds. I eat those because they're actually not nuts. They're from the cherry family.
Okay, and of those fish and nuts, are there ones that are more anxiety-provoking to you or least anxiety-provoking?
Yeah, I'd say pine nuts,
Okay.
pecans, walnuts, pistachios. Those are all at the very top.
Okay. So those are a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, you'd say?
Yeah.
Okay. What about other kinds of nuts?
Well, like peanuts are probably more like a 5. Because I know I've had those before with no problems. I've just been scared that maybe I got re-allergic to them again because I had those on the day I had the reaction, but it was like hours before. So I think that maybe, well, it's possible that those are still okay. Plus, I have eaten things with peanuts in it since then without knowing it, like in pastries or something like that, and nothing has happened. So I figure, like, logically those aren't so bad, but I still feel, like, really anxious about it, like, about it still here.
Okay, so you believe in your head that everything's probably going to be fine if I eat peanuts, but like you don't really like believe it in your gut.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't you write like the pine nuts and pecans and walnuts and stuff up at 10, because you said those were the
Okay.
worst, and then write peanuts at 5. Okay, and then is that a pretty exhaustive list of like all the nuts that you would want to be able to eat
Yeah.
and that you've had? Okay,
That's pretty good.
so what about fish?
Shellfish is definitely a 10. Like, any clams, scallops, shrimp. Okay, shrimp is less than, like, clams or scallops.
Okay, so clams and scallops are a 10, and shrimp is what?
Like an 8,
Okay,
probably.
like
I don't
an
know.
8. Okay, what about other types of fish?
Um, well, that's less than shellfish, so it's still pretty scary to me, though. So most fish is about the same level for me, like a 7. I
Okay,
guess.
so all other fish is about equally anxiety provoking for you, about a 7. So you wrote that down already. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there other foods that are anxiety provoking to you?
Yeah, well, mostly anything new. But that just comes up in life. You know, like,
Okay.
I don't try any new Indian food or anything like that. I think I want to focus on these more regular foods before I do that.
Okay, so you just want to add like more things to your diet and stuff like that, so we can just focus on these. Are there any others you want to add to the list?
Maybe, like, fruits, like mangoes and pomegranates and stuff. I never eat those at all. So I get a little anxious if they are in something else, like a smoothie or something. Avocados, too.
Okay. So where would you put those on the list?
Probably, well, I don't know. Maybe like a 4. Pretty close to peanuts, because I've probably had them before, but I still get anxious about it.
Okay. All right. So for comparison, what food would be like a number 1?
Probably like rice
Okay.
or pasta or meat. I know I can eat all those things without having a problem.
Okay. All right. So go ahead and write that down under number 1. Okay, so what would you think about picking one of the foods on the lower end of the list and trying it out this week? You could think of it like an experiment to see if your automatic thoughts are true about being allergic or those foods being unsafe. You could make an appointment with Dr. Smith and do your first experiment there. So you have him there and you could try the one that was at the bottom of your list.
Okay. Well, I'm pretty nervous about it, but I think now that I've just had my appointments with him, I could do it. I'm more confident that it might be okay, especially if I do it at his office.
Okay. So I feel really optimistic, and I think this will go really well for you. What food do you think you'd want to start with as your experiment this week?
How about avocado? I think we have some at home already, and that's one of Ryan's favorite foods, so it would be good if I learned to eat it.
Okay. So why don't you write down on your therapy notes under homework Make appointment with Dr. Smith to do avocado experiment.
Okay.
Okay, now, is there anything that you could see getting in the way of doing this experiment?
I don't know, I guess if I can't get an appointment.
That's true. Okay. So what could you do that would increase the chances of you getting an appointment?
Well, I could call right away after today's session. The earlier I call, the more likely they'll have an appointment available.
Okay, that's a good idea. Can you think of any other obstacles?
Well, the only thing I'm worried about is if I really do have an allergic reaction.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What's the worst thing that you imagine could happen?
Well, I could eat some avocado and then have a really bad reaction, I don't know, anaphylactic one.
Okay.
Anaphylactic one.
So, I bet that's really scary to think about.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, what might happen if you have an anaphylactic reaction?
Well, if I'm at the doctor's, he'll be able to get me an EpiPen shot and then I'll be fine.
Okay. So what's the best case scenario?
Well, I try to get a new food and I like it. I try a new food and I like it and I don't have any kind of reaction from it at all.
Exactly. So do you think you might be able to tell yourself to imagine that scenario instead of the bad one?
Yeah. I will try.
Okay. Great. Why don't we write that down as part of your homework too? You can write it down under the other one about traveling because it's very similar. So when I start to imagine that I will have a bad allergic reaction, I'll imagine a best scenario instead. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So we are almost out of time. Are there any other burning issues you really want to talk about before we wrap up?
No, I'm okay. I think this one has been really helpful, so.
Okay, great. Let's summarize what we've talked about today. Sometimes it helps clients remember what we've discussed in therapy when they can summarize it for themselves. Do you think you could summarize what we've talked about?
Yeah. Well, okay. Let's see. We talked about Thanksgiving.
Right. And do you remember what we talked about specifically about that?
Yeah, we talked about traveling home, and we talked about how I always imagine the worst about tunnels, and then we changed my negative images into positive ones.
Exactly. So you described your negative images to me, and then we changed them into positive ones. What else did we talk about?
Well, we talked about my food stuff, too. I told you about how I really wanted to start working on that and incorporating more everyday foods into my diet. And we talked about starting with the least scary ones and working up to the most scary ones.
Right. Okay, so now let's review the homework we talked about doing for this week.
Okay, I wrote down, let's see, when I start to imagine the worst case scenario about traveling this week, I will start to imagine the best case scenario instead.
Right, so you're going to try and make sure that when you catch yourself starting to have automatic thoughts about your travel and the tunnel, that you'll switch your negative images into those positive ones you created.
Yeah.
Okay, what else did we say was from homework for next week?
Basically it was to do the same thing when it comes to imagining bad situations in regards to food, to change my image and thoughts to be the best case scenario instead.
Right, exactly. Did you write that one down?
Yeah, well, I just put an arrow down and put quotes there. Maybe I should actually write it out.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. I mean, it's sometimes easier for clients to remember exactly what they're supposed to think of when it's written out explicitly. I've written in my notes, when I start to imagine that I will have a bad allergic reaction, I will imagine a best scenario instead.
Okay.
Okay. And then what else do we have for homework?
Just to continue my relaxation exercise. And do you still want me to do the anxiety checklist thing?
Well, you don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. I know the checklist might not seem very helpful during the week, but over the course of treatment, it can be really helpful for both of us to see what's helping or not helping your anxiety by looking at how your symptoms change every week.
Okay, so I'll keep doing it.
Okay, perfect. Now, is that all of it?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. Now, like usual, I'd like to ask you for your feedback on today's session. Is there anything that you didn't like? Anything you'd like me to do differently?
I don't know.
I mean, I really appreciate any feedback that you have. It's really important that therapy is collaborative, and that means I need to know what is and isn't helpful to you.
Okay, well, there really isn't anything. I guess sometimes I feel like really silly telling you the dumb stuff I worry about. I worry about thinking that it's stupid.
Okay. Is there anything I'm doing that makes you think that? Like, that makes you think I feel that way?
No. I mean, well, maybe like your facial expressions sometimes. I don't know. I might just be imagining it.
Okay. Cecilia, I really appreciate you telling me that. I wasn't aware of that at all. Please understand that I don't think you or your problems are silly or stupid. We all have our own anxieties and problems, and I think yours are as normal as any other.
Really?
Yeah, definitely. I'm so glad you brought that up because I would never want you to feel that way. I'll try to be more mindful of my reactions in the future. Please don't hesitate to tell me if that bothers you in the future.
Okay, I won't.
Okay. Unfortunately, our time is up for today. Is next week at this time still good for you?
Yeah, that's fine. I can still call you if I need something, right?
Yeah, you can always call if you feel that you need to.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Cecilia. Have a great week. I look forward to seeing how your experiment and your Thanksgiving works out.
Okay.